Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Mike Tobash of the 125th District in Schuylkill and Berks counties. Pennsylvania has spent over $200 million creating and implementing 3 keystone exams to fulfill the requirements of No Child Left Behind by current law. An additional 7 must be in place by the year 2020-2021 school year. In an effort to make sure schools have time to adapt to the exams and that Pennsylvania's students will benefit as intended, I've introduced legislation to halt the State Department of Education from developing and implementing further standardized tests for 10 years. Joining me today to provide their viewpoints are Andrew Smarkanik, Superintendent of North Schuylkill High School. Andy, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Tiffany Reedy, Principal of the Pottsville Area High School, and John Powers Jr., CEO of Ash Tech Incorporated. Thank you all for joining me here today.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
So we just got back from a hearing on Keystone exams. The Education Department listened to testimony that you were good enough to offer. I appreciate your expertise in different areas. You know, when we started the hearing today, I talked about a little bit of a timeline, and the timeline kind of goes like this. In 2006, there was concern brought about by business and by higher education about the preparedness of people who are exiting our high schools, okay? And as a result of that concern about a belief that having a diploma, that the diploma wasn't credible to enter the job force or higher ed, we started going down a path, and duly noted, a path that federal legislation has been going down for quite some time with the PSSA exams, but developing a set of exams in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania called the Keystone exams, okay? And since then, we've had many discussions, and I've talked to stakeholders, including people from higher education and yourselves, and I'm happy that you were there today to testify, and I'd like to just talk to you a little bit more about your perspective on the exams. Andrew, I'll let you go first, okay. Dr. Smarkanik, and you, I mean, look, to me, you had riveting testimony. The fact of the matter is you understand the dynamic of entering these standardized tests into a place of education that's got a lot of moving parts. And you've got some experience and history in this area, a personal perspective. So can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the exams?
Not every student can take a standardized test with the same proficiency. There are students that cannot pass a standardized test, but ultimately can do well in the classroom. I'm a product of that. I never did test it well in standardized tests, but throughout my career, both in college and post-college, I have my Bachelor's of Education. I received my principal certification, Superintendent's Letter of Eligibility, and Doctor of Education, but I never performed well in standardized tests. And to ask students to take that test and maybe not meet that benchmark, what does it do to them not only emotionally, but what does it do to them long term? They may not look at a professional career. They may be looking at something other than that. And I think it's important to understand that not all students can perform at the same level. And to take that into consideration and putting graduation requirement based on one standardized test, I think is not doing justice not only to our students, it's not doing justice to potential dropout rate, and what that ultimately can perpetuate itself, and you as a legislator will have to deal with.
Sure. So look, you talk about this dropout rate, okay? I mean, look, there's something that's very important about our education system, and that's getting people to constantly improve, okay? One of the concerns that I've heard is that some of these exams can be demoralizing to a certain segment of the student population. Can you tell me your feelings on that?
Well, I think that any exam can cause some angst for the test taker, be it the SAT or the ACTs when you're going on to a college. But students going into an exam, there is always an angst that occurs. And I remember going back to my high school days and taking the Stanford Binet standardized test, and the angst that was with that. And 40 years later, we still wonder what those results were. What was the significance of taking those tests? Obviously, we need to be able to put some sort of merit on what we're teaching in the classrooms. I don't think anybody will argue the fact that what happens in the classroom should be tested, tried and true. But the method of the testing and making that a graduation requirement, if not done properly, I think could cause a lot of concerns. There was a program that was going forward 3 years ago called PA Leads, which I was involved with our school district. There were one of 9 school districts throughout the state that was involved in the project. And the whole crux of and core of the project was to get school districts involved with the SAS models, Common Core standards. And from that, those school districts were going to go out and mentor other schools. So eventually, a total web would be put throughout the state that all the school districts would be under the same umbrella regarding standards. Right now, not all school districts are under the same umbrella. And to have a standardized test out there testing something that all school districts should be teaching is not happening.
So I'd like to switch over and talk about business a little bit again. I mean, you know, we constantly hear in state government, federal government, jobs, 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 okay? Last year, I think at some point in time, I think it was last year, I was at a meeting in Carbon County, and when we had the director of their economic development corporation was there, okay? And she stood up and she said, you know, we got 9.9% unemployment rate in Carbon County, okay? And then the next person came up was an employer, Tobash Fire Equipment, one of the largest employers in the county. John, you probably know them. And you know, their comment was, the human resources director there said that, you know, we're having trouble getting good quality employees, okay? And I think it goes back to some of the things that business has asked for, okay? Coming out of high school, a level of proficiency is important, right? And the ability to learn, to not use drugs, to show up at work, right? To want to do the work that's offered there, and they're good quality jobs. And then the last person that got up was the head of their vocational program up there, and said, we just spent $20 million on our VOTEC here, and we can't get kids in the program. So talk about a disconnect. I constantly hear about this disconnect. Now, you were at the hearing today, you testified, and that's one of the points that I made with you. Can you tell me more about what your belief is with these exams? And do you think that they're going to close the gap in this disconnect between employers and educators?
Well, I do come from the outcome side of things. So the educators are living with it and dealing with it every day, and how they get the kids from point A to point B, and it is an end game for them. Not that they're not concerned about the well-being of the child after graduation, but that is the primary goal. My goal then is to take those students, take those graduates that are coming out, and make sure that they have careers, that they have opportunities going down the road to succeed even further, continue their learning experience, and have a good career where they can support a family, stay in the area, and continue the tradition we have here of a great work ethic and great manufacturing sector. I mean, Pennsylvania as a whole is a manufacturing state. We want it to thrive. We want to buy American, we want to buy Pennsylvanian. Well, now I look at it and say, is there a disconnect between the business community and the education community and what we need? And I definitely think there is. One would be, there is a standardized test we're talking about here, the Keystone exams, where there are 8, 10, 3, whatever you choose, subjects that were picked that say, okay, this student now can graduate high school. This is making him the employable person to get to the next level. And it's simply unrealistic to randomly pick 8 subjects and say, this is what will make this person successful. The whole idea of education, in my point, is in my opinion, is to teach the critical thinking skills. It's to teach the problem solving that you're going to face every day of your career as you go forward. And that ability to learn and to know why things happen as opposed to what the answer is.
So you would advocate more flexibility?
Absolutely.
And you think that maybe these exams don't offer more flexibility?
My worry when I see the way that it seems to be being implemented is that it's going to narrow the curriculum, which one is that you must emphasize all of your time, all of your coursework toward reaching these goals that have been set by the state. Now, that has to mean that other classes won't be offered. That means that you won't have enough time to work through the problems in those classes. Now, all of a sudden, Does VOTEC, which is already stigmatized to a certain level by both certain sects of students as well as parents in some ways, they don't want their kid in VOTEC, not understanding that that's probably the #1 area for a successful career without being saddled with $150,000 of debt coming out of college. We have a tendency to say, these are the 8 things we think are important. Well, now we end up with 1,000 graduates that are all good at those 8 things, and we've lost a great amount of skill that could have been brought out of these kids by taking other classes. Whether it be a little highly technical, such as electrical engineering or a drafting course, but even art classes and things like that. I've often said, my child, he loves using clay sculptures and building things like that. Well, that's the first step towards 3D modeling, 3D printing, understanding the spatial relationships and things like that. And if all of a sudden that's taken out of the curriculum and not offered, I worry about the quality of people we'll have graduating, not the quality of students. They'll obviously have fulfilled their requirement, but does that make them an employable person going forward?
You know, and look, here's what occurs to me. That, I mean, I think Ashland Technology is a perfect example. You know, you go into the Higgins Valley, you know, you make a left-hand turn, you come up on a facility right there. What are you guys manufacturing?
We do some of the neatest things ever. I mean, our showpiece item is that we make chassis for wooden roller coasters. I mean, one is right down in Hershey at the Wildcat. We just completed the chassis for the Knoebels Flying Turns, which finally opened this year. Now, there's a perfect project right there where it took someone who didn't necessarily ace chemistry, biology, algebra 1, but he had great skills, great technical skills, understood the physics and the dynamics of rides like that, and then was able to go out to a computer-controlled machine and make all those parts to ridiculously tight tolerances to make sure everyone's safe and it's a fun ride. You know, it's just one of those things where every machine in our building is run by a computer. You have to understand X, Y, Z axes. You have to understand the relationship between numbers and things like that. It's a technical job.
I mean, and diversity. I mean, you're just talking about these different products that you manufacture that are so diverse, right?
Right.
And I think, again, if we go back to the conversation on standardized testing, I mean, we got a diverse population within the Commonwealth. We have diversity in our school districts. You know, how are we going to just standardize everything and think, boom? Because you're not cookie cuttering what you do.
That's right.
You need people that can think.
Right, and not only is it customer based, we are technically a job shop or contract, so we don't make our own product. But one day we're working on parts for grills in fast food restaurants. The next day for truck bodies. The next day a roller coaster. And we have different disciplines within where there are welders, there are machinists, there are finishers, and that whole concept of just walking in every day and doing the same thing from 8 till 5 is gone. And you have to be able to adapt every day. You have to understand when a new product comes through, what's the best way to make it? What's the best way to improve the process? You know, manufacturing engineering is all about making something better once it's already built. And if we don't have kids with problem-solving skills, we'll be stuck with the same thing we had in the year 2013. We'll have it in 2020. And in the meantime, the world will have passed us by. And we'll have to look overseas for things like that.
Now, Tiffany, I kept you on the sideline a little bit, okay, here. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here because there's some things that you know, I think with this endeavor, again, starting in 2006, it kind of went like this. We've stated the problem. Hey, the problem is diplomas oftentimes are not credible. In other words, somebody has a high school diploma. That doesn't mean they know these certain basic skills that society expects them to know, that employers expect them to know, that higher education expects them to know, okay? Do you think that the Keystone exam model that we're under right now, 5, and then 5 more on the tail of that, is going to get us to that point, to make every diploma credible?
I don't. I think there are other measures that we already have in place that also gauge student understanding. So you have standardized testing such as the SAT, the ACT. We offer 11 AP courses at our district, and many students take advantage of that. So I think there's other avenues in order for our students to show that they are worth that paper, that diploma that they have received.
Do you think it takes away from the ability to accomplish some of those other avenues?
I do. I see at the
Why?
ground level, because that's, you know, my perspective is from the ground level, seeing the testing implemented. Everything looks nice on paper, but when you execute it and you see the impact that it has on what we do at our school on a daily basis, not just during testing, I think it gives you a deeper understanding. So for example, this time that we are spending testing, our students are out of the classroom. They are either engaged in testing or another activity, so they may be missing their AP computer science class or their AP calculus class, or they may be missing their time at the vocational school because they are setting aside that time, and it's very lengthy.
There was a testifier today, and I'm not sure who it was, Andy, maybe it was even you, that talked about metal shop. I mean, you're talking about metal shop here, okay? I mean, it's a skill set that that people who want to get into manufacturing should be able to receive, I think, and they should be able to develop their interest in that kind of thing. But you know, there's a lot of things. My daughter's a good example that loved publications, the yearbook class at Pottsville, so she loved that. And not that she didn't do well in other subjects, but I got to tell you, when she got up in the morning, I think she got up in the morning looking forward to going to school so she could go to the publications class, right? Then she had other curriculum that she took, and you know, I almost think sometimes that maybe, you know, pub got her through Algebra 2, you know, because she was going there and she wanted to do it. I mean, we hear about, again, the amount of these exams maybe narrowing curriculum, taking away some other things that many students and many employers might think are valuable curriculum because of the overwhelming amount of time that we have to devote to these. Can you tell me about the time factor a little bit?
Sure, and it's not just the time that we spend testing, but also while this becomes a graduation requirement, our students will need to be proficient. So we need to offer them remediation, and that may take away their elective time, their art classes that they're interested in, that John spoke about, their drawing classes, their publications, if they're going to be a student that wants to be a journalist. The Keystone exam in biology wouldn't be relevant, but that pub class that they enjoy so much that drives them to go to school every day would be very important. And that's what we worry about with the limited staffing we currently have. As we add more and shuffle more staffing around to accommodate this remediation, are we going to lose our electives? Are we going to lose these AP courses where we have fewer students enrolled, but they're very valuable for our students?
You know, I go back and think of my daughter, and I'll let you jump in then. But you know, look, so maybe she's a writer for a newspaper at some point in time, and composition, which is one of the Keystone exams, is very important, right? But you know, publications class is pretty important too if you want to be a writer or an editor for a newspaper at some point in time. Andy, you were going to talk about
There's another issue that came to our superintendent's meeting this past week about the remediation for those students at VOTEC schools. We're on a 90-day about situation with our VOTEC students. Some Columbia and Monterey, they may have a self-contained situation, but with our students go 90 days to the VOTEC schools and 90 days at home school. Well, who in that time period would be responsible for the remediation for those students? And who's going to prepare them for the exams for those students that are at the VOTEC school at that period of time? So, I mean, there's a lot of other factors that come into play. And, you know, again, you're dealing with a population of students that would sooner be working with their hands than worrying about a biology exam.
I'm going to go back. I just want to hit on time a little bit more because I want to understand it, because it's one of the complaints that I hear. I mean, come on. Look, it's easy. It's a test. You're in school. You're used to testing. I mean, at the end of a course, you're going to go ahead and offer an exam to this segment. Why is it so difficult?
Well, it's an end-of-the-year competency, but not everyone passes the first time. So the time will be reinvested when we do the remediation, but also the time that PDE sets aside for a traditional module is not always the time that it takes. Certain students require extended time, and while they're in that extended time setting, they're missing their regular classes, or they have been absent for a day and they need to take makeup sessions, and that impacts, it's a domino effect on the educational process.
So what happens after? I mean, look, if somebody didn't pass the exam, then they should receive additional learning. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, how does that fit into why is that problematic?
It does, but for instance, if you have a student that doesn't pass all three, and we remediate them in all three subjects, and they're also taking their courses that they need to achieve a diploma based on our Board of Education standards, where does that leave time for them to have the elective courses, the arts, the foreign language, those courses that maybe they will pursue as a career, maybe they will use as a minor in college, but you know, it's something to accentuate their education, not just the standard math, you know, and their reading courses and just other things that maybe will encourage our population of students that doesn't get up every morning saying, I love school, I can't wait to go to school. But that little hook that brings them to school every day.
Gotcha. So hey, somebody coined the phrase, it's quite some time, I don't know when, but teaching to the test, okay? So, I mean, look, there's a mentality that's alive out there that we develop these, you know, what's wagging the dog here, you know? We develop these exams, and now we're just going in there and having to feed information to be regurgitated so we can get by with some success level at what the state or the federal government has measured as successful or unsuccessful, and many times, Andy, tied funding to that.
Oh, absolutely.
So teaching to the test.
Teaching the test, you know, you have students that are teachers teaching certain standards, and those standards change. It's a moving target for most part. What you think you're maybe covering this year based on last year's testing changed based on whatever DRC has made the new requirements for this year. But going back to what Tiff said with regard to remediation, with the lack of teachers, because with funding as it has been, we had to cut staff. We would have to hire maybe 3 new staff members for the remediation process, because all of our staff right now is basically teaching 6 of the 7 periods. And to accommodate the remediation process, we'll be looking at additional staff members, which is additional cost to the school district.
Tiffany, any other comments on?
I just think it goes back to the quote that I heard, you don't grow the steer by weighing them more. So I think the money could be better spent investing in teaching our students, coming up with some new strategies, remediating when necessary, versus plunging all of these resources into testing.
So the idea behind the piece of legislation that I have says, look, we're gonna have 5 of these exams, right? And we've heard a lot of pushback on both sides. There was just testimony from the Independent Regulatory Review Commission on November 21st, and I read some of that testimony, and boy, there's a lot of people that have some good ideas or good comments about the pros, and some people that have comments about the cons, okay? Excuse me, but there's some things that really 4 points that I like to make here that I'm concerned about. Number one, not wasting, okay, not taking taxpayer dollars, all right, and spending them on something that isn't going to get results, okay? So I think that if we put the brakes on these after 5 and measure the tests and how successful they are, then we'll understand whether or not we should spend more taxpayer dollars on these exams. Number 2, understanding the results to that point, and then the unintended consequences, okay? And maybe I'm not thinking of all of those, but if we have 10 exams in the Commonwealth and they're taking a lot of time testing and taking away from learning, I'm concerned about what some of the unintended consequences are. Is there anything you might offer as insight to what you think might occur as we continue to go down this path of standardization?
Well, just some of the things that we spoke about today I think are very valid points that many people brought up, including the extra resources needed for students who aren't proficient. So there is an alternative, the project-based assessment. Who would oversee that? If they don't achieve that, there was talk today about the superintendents being able to provide a release for 10% of the population, but still that's going back to sort of circumventing what the legislation was meant to do. And I just think that the resources, we have limited resources. It's an economic fundamental, you know, limited resources and unlimited wants. And we need to look at how we're investing our money. Will there be more dropouts? Will kids opt to get a GED because it's an easier way for them to get, you know, that ticket out of high school? And I think we will be leaving a population behind of students who, as Dr. Smarkanik said, don't test well, kids who aren't good in a particular area. I think of, you know, my brother who's a chemical engineer. I don't know if he could pass the biology exam, but he's a chemical engineer and he's vice president of his company.
It was one of the reasons that we took those sample questions and sent them out to some people to have them take a look at it and say, is this what you're looking for? And the answer has been a resounding no. Wow, people don't need to know that to work at Ashland Technologies. I'm looking for something different. And I think that narrowing of curriculum and the idea of not being as diversified as we can be becomes problematic.
And I think they keep referring it to it as Algebra 1, it really isn't Algebra 1. It's Algebra 1.5 with very deep understanding necessary for proficiency. So it isn't the Algebra 1 course that maybe we took in high school. It's much more beyond that. The questions aren't scaffolded. They involve much more critical thinking, higher level thinking. So I know today often in testimony they refer to it as just basic math. I would challenge most people to pass that test.
You know,
It's
there's an
very
argument out
difficult.
there about rigor. We need more
very
rigor, and it's going to give people. I mean, the increased rigor is going to give them an increased level of learning and maybe the ability to learn. But I had a comment from one of my good friends. He talked about displaced rigor. That okay, you know, you can spend a whole lot of time working on this, but if it's not the thing that the employer is looking for, or higher ed is looking for, well, all the rigor in the world isn't going to get you to the spot that you want to be. I thought that the testimony today at the hearing, certainly it was diverse. We heard a lot of different people testifying. Andy, can I get your Dr. Smarcanic apologize? Can I get your some feedback on what you thought about today's hearing?
I thought there's obviously
Any thoughts or any comments?
had both sides of the argument with regard to testing. Obviously, I don't think there's any superintendent in this state that would say that we don't need to test our curriculum and make sure that we're teaching our students appropriately and making sure that our taxpayers are getting a good bang for their buck. But I think the important thing is that not all kids test the way the test is supposed. The test is set out to judge them on, and that we need to maybe look at a different form of diploma that we are going to be issuing.
John, I asked you to come here kind of last minute. We had somebody from SAPA, large employer, human resources, and we talked to them about this testing dynamic. At some point in time, gave them the sample questions, and they're in some labor negotiations right now, couldn't make it, so I kind of asked you to come in on a shoestring. I appreciate you being here, and I know you got the expertise. Look, you've worked with workforce development with the chamber as CEO of AshTech in a lot of different areas. So you got to testify in front of the House today. Any impressions on the testimony, the hearing? Any thoughts?
No, really, I just think that everyone obviously is on the same page with wanting to have kids graduate high school with the necessary skills to succeed. It's just how do we do it? And I think unless you go to the education community and you go to the business community, you can't make that decision in a vacuum. You cannot pick what's going to make somebody else a successful individual coming out of high school. It has to be determined by a wider group. And I think we're all on the same track there, and I think the feedback from everybody really allowed the representatives to make a good decision on the matter.
So the point is we have to have you and you and you at the same table, right? We have to be at the same table.
Statewide.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Tiffany, again, thank you for your testimony today, traveling down here today on a snowy day. Any thoughts on today's hearing?
I enjoyed the opportunity. I think it's important for the legislators to, again, get the ground level perception of how this legislation translates into the human experience, how it impacts our students, our teachers, and our staff. And again, I think it's not understated that we all, again, from our perspective, expect our students to go out ready for whatever path they choose, whether it's the career force, the military, or college, or some post-secondary training.
Thanks. I mean, there's a lot of room for improvement here. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
room to connect the dots and get everyone together and in an effort to do better. That's all the time we have for today's program. I can assist you with any state government matter. Please feel free to contact me at my office or through my website. That information will be shown in a moment. Thank you for watching, and please join me again for Legislative Report. Thank you.